This is Bigfoot Anonymous.
My dad's best friend saw one back in 1981 here in South Louisiana. He walked close enough to his deer stand that he could smell it. He didn't even think about shooting it for fear it wouldn't kill it with a .30-06. He never went hunting again. This was a man who loved the outdoors. I've seen one in southeastern Missouri. Was in my rural backyard. Heard the footfall, but it didn't register. What the fuck? I was hearing because I was watching a YouTube video on my phone. Video ended and heard two more footfalls. Shined my flashlight and seen a silhouette of a person with two green glowing eyes. My first thought was a person screwing with me, till I realized human eyes don't glow in the dark. The only thing I knew to do in my state of panic was to scream, "Hey," and make myself look big as if I was a bear. The next day I found a print that was about 15 yards from where I was sitting, and a fresh path that had ripped through the cedar and honey locust thicket behind my house. Scared the crap out of me enough that I don't go outside without a gun in my own backyard. I just wish I knew what I had seen that night, but would rather not have it encounter at the same time. I almost hit one with my car 14 years ago in southern Ontario. I remember looking in my mirror, lighting up everything with my brake lights, and seeing the silhouette of an easy 7 to 8 feet tall Bigfoot. I enjoyed fishing on the St. Croix River, Maine, New Brunswick. I had run the lake since I was 10 or so. By 13, I was by myself. Water could get 9-foot swells when the wind was up, rain or otherwise. I was on the lake. Whitefish, bass, pickerel. I was fishing, using the wind to drift me over good beds. It was summer, about 7 p.m., a couple more hours before light was gone. It was super dense forest. Something, which sounded like was not more than 50 yards in the woods, bellowed at me. I was 20 or so yards from the shore and never have been so much panicked. But this turned on the switch that I've never had before, nor since. Got the motor running, put 100 yards from the shore, and stopped. I could hear branches breaking like a moose going full tilt in brush, but was heading north along the high ground. Then nothing. I've tried to figure this out, but the only thing that makes sense is an old one. It's been 45 years. I believe I heard one in the woods behind my old apartment building. I heard a woman or girl call out, "Help me." When I heard it, it was actually recording something in the sky. A strange object I've noticed a few times. I'm not being a troll, but at the apartment building there was nothing but bush and a river. It wasn't the first time I heard it in the summer. I've never seen one, but I've heard really strange noises in the forest. It sounded like a cat coughing up a fur ball, but louder. But no change in pitch, volume, or rhythm for at least 30 minutes. Unknown source. To my ears, it was so consistent and seemed like a music studio sound effect. I was with a retired full-bird colonel, a neighbor, the other day. I told him about a scream I heard 2 months ago while I was in my tent on my property. It let loose at 3 a.m. and the coyotes went nuts. It should screamed again, and the coyote shut up. Anyway, the neighbor said cat. I said nope. He said yo. I said nope. He said, oh, it was Susie. I'm like, who's Susie? He said, female Sasquatch. His dad, a World War II vet, had a bunch of run-ins with her. This guy was 100% serious. He told me to go talk to his dad in the nursing home about what he saw. In the Tahoe National Park area, I was with a group of researchers one night. We heard a loud roaring howl, similar to the Ohio Bigfoot howl, only much longer, approximately 15 seconds long. It came from behind us, up a canyon, several hundred yards away. Our friends at the base camp, which was 3 miles away from us in the opposite direction from the howl, heard it as well. So we're talking about a 15-second long beastly howl that was heard 3+ miles away. That was the first night. The second night, we heard the same exact howl at the same time, roughly 11:30. Only this time the howl originated approximately 50 yards away from the base camp. Our group was again about 3 miles away, and we still heard it. When we got back to the camp sometime around 1 o'clock, the people at the base camp were in a panic. They said the noise was right over there, just in the trees. One couple even packed their tent gear and left that night. They were that scared. Two friends, my wife and I, were in the area west of Tassos, August 2013. We were anchored off the shore about 200 feet, sleeping on a dead calm night with a very light drizzle, very quiet. Around 1:30 a.m. I got woken up to some very loud whooping, series of loud calls, rising in pitch. You could lightly feel the sound reverberating in your chest. First calls must have woken me up, but once awake I distinctly heard the rest, but of short duration, only about 5 seconds worth. Later on, I did my research on owl and big cat calls and came up with nothing even close. I've been a woodsman for 50 years and know many natural sounds, but these sounds were new to me. I'm a light sleeper, so unfortunately I was the only one who heard the calls. Next day I had my binoculars on the rocky hillside, but saw nothing. Had something very heavy walk on two legs walk methodically across our roof one night in 1975 or so. Thud, thud, thud. Never saw anything. Was home alone on a farm in northwest Tennessee, too scared to go outside even though I loaded up every rifle and shotgun in the house. Ground was so hard, so no prints the next day. It was difficult to go to our barn through the woods, a quarter of a mile at night after that. I was glad when we moved to the city. I've been hunting all my life, starting when I was about 7, going with my father. We are Hispanic and have a lot of native blood in our family. We have always hunted in the thick woods of the Texas Hill Country. When I was about 12, I was hunting squirrel in the winter, and I was squatted down in a dry creek bed. I heard only one step behind me and looked behind to see a very large male Sasquatch, about 8 to 10 feet tall, only about 5 feet from me. He made a loud grunt when I faced him, then bolted into the brush. On that property, we've seen what we presumed to be a family of Sasquatch, seen many sightings, and never really had problems with them. They just watched us. I once had a 14 deer bait pile with snares set on every trail in and out of the set, out to 500 yards. Many snares. One day in January, I found a head-hit roadkill mature doe. I took her to the pile. The very next day, she was gone. The critter that took her never hit a single snare, no tracks, and I've always been a believer ever since. I've never felt so afraid in the woods as I did that day looking for that doe. It was impossible, and still is. No explanation. I am a knower. After I seen a 10-foot tall gorilla in the summer of 2000 in northern Michigan, I believe this is Esau of the books of Genesis and Obadiah, and I have gone over this with my friends, Father, there, Ojibwa, and he has told me that I'm spot on with my theory of this nocturnal nation of people who are different mannered than any modern human because of their brains, who are no question stronger physically, who is known to dominant red hair gene in their population, who eat venison as their main staple of diet, who are the cunning hunter, not because they hunt, but how they hunt. Who does give off a foul odor? Who does have their dominant presence? Who does live in the high and rocky places? Who does have a secret hidden ways? Who is known to never deplete a food source, but always leave a few to repopulate the food stock, and for time they are through an area that has no understanding of them because they're pre-human brains, the Sasquatch. I know they exist. They attacked our horses up in California, Eagle Meadow area, and Crabtree Trailhead in 97. We were camping for a week. It was horrifying. The horses were terrified. They were hopping over each other in fear, and they never acted this way. They are barrel racing, rodeo horses, and new trail and did parades. There were at least 3 of them we saw running away after they charged down a hill at our campsite and towards the horses. They ran back into the tree line when we spotted them. After living in northern Alberta on the Alexander First Nation Reservation, I have seen and heard a few things in my life. I was born in Athens, Tennessee, then moved all over the North American country being a truck driver. I have been from Boggy Creek to the Arkansas and all the points in between. I have first-hand knowledge of them, so believe me when I say, give them space and watch your 6. They see you before you see them. Stay safe. 1989, in my semi, I-80 heading near Clearfield, PA, 2 a.m., no traffic, riding straddling the center line because all the deer are feeding on the side of the road. Running 55-60, I saw a big barrel-chested thing come out of the wooded medium crossing north to south. I had 1,000 thoughts run through my mind, trying to find something in my pea brain to explain what I was seeing. It crossed the eastbound 2 lanes in 3 steps and started uphill on the south side of the interstate. I knew it wasn't a bear, so that was my story, and it changed how I act when I ride my side-by-side in the woods in southwest PA. I was deer hunting with a cousin in the Tuolumne River drainage on the west slope of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. As I was gathering wood, we were setting up camp at dusk. I smelled a horrible stench pass by me on the light breeze. I looked windward, but saw nothing in the warning light. Rob had noticed the smell as he was setting up his tent. I began cooking supper. By the time we ate and hit the sack, it was full dark and the moon had set. About 30 minutes after we wrecked, there were the most blood-curdling growl, roar, scream that I've ever heard in my life. It felt as if the sound was going back to our own lungs. Our intestines vibrated with the noise. I lit up, shielded flashlight to see Rob. He had 44 Super Blackhawk on his chest, which was the exact posture I adopted with my 44 mag Red Hawk. About 2 minutes later, the roar was repeated. Then again, a couple minutes later, seemed like it was further up the canyon. Now, I've been around livestock for most of my life. I was within 20 feet of a bullfight that broke out between Bahama Bull and the Aberdeen Angus. You know how they bellow and roar. They build up to actual combat. The noise we heard was much louder, longer, and lung-shaking than the bull's racket, and a whole lot more intimidating. It seemed to start as a low, loud, guttural growl, rising in pitch and volume, ending in a deafening scream. Needless to say, there was no sleep that night. The next day, less than a mile from camp, along the bluff overlooking the river, we found 16 to 17-inch bare footprints in the snow and mud less than a mile from our camp. They were very plain and clear. There was one that seep crossed the trail, and the mud was still clearing in a small puddle through which seep ran through the rim of the canyon. I laid my rifle down at the heel of the one print and used a measuring reference. It was 1 1.5 rifle lengths from the heel to the right footprint of the heel of the left print. My rifle measured exactly 44 inches when I measured at home. These prints were 1.5 times the length of my size 13 Dunner hunting boots. My boots measured 13 inches even, heel to toe. I'm 6'5", and my stride averages 36 inches. In the area of the tracks, there were no other tracks of any kind since snowfall. They could not possibly have been pranked. Whatever made the tracks was alone on the trail. It's a pretty big fellow that leaves 17 to 18-inch tracks with a 5.5-foot stride. We never did get to look at the beast. The tracks led to the east and away from the river canyon. We chose not to follow them in the thicker vegetation. We moved camp. Another cousin has actually seen one of the big fellows. He won't camp anymore. He sold all his gear. Only a few weeks ago, I had what appeared to be Bigfoots mess with my campsite when I was away from it for 2 days, when they went as far off to move my tent and set it back up standing about 40 yards behind where it was pitched. The prints were huge, and one had 4 toes, and the other had 3 toes. I've encountered one also. I've never got to see it, but the smell was horrendous. I was in a tree stand. The noise it made was like no noise I've heard before. Goosebumps were going up and down my back. It was very angry because I had a small fire going on the base of the tree. I'll never forget it, nor have I ever went back there. Hi, from Michigan. Here's a story, 1980-ish. Upper Peninsula of Michigan, hunting whitetail. Found abandoned brush blind, sitting in it till dark. Watching down logger skid trail. Getting darker, watching through scope. Suddenly, 2 big red eyes, I mean big, alongside a tree 100 yards away, staring at me. I saw the outline of a man, a big man. Scared me. Eyes were gone. Dark now. Hurried the hell out. Half-mile walk to truck. Hair on the back of my neck standing all the way up. Went back the next day to retrieve gloves. Gone. Walked down Scared Trail, 1 glove here. A little farther, another glove. Went to tree where I saw the eyes and outline. Eyes were 7 feet off the ground. You decide. BS. I'm not a BSer. PS. I'm not a BSer or storyteller. I've never told anyone this. Happened about 35 years ago. I spotlighted deer many times. This was different. I wasn't using a light of any kind. How could those eyes glow like that? And they were bigger. Also, I didn't even think of Sasquatch or Bigfoot at the time. I thought devil or demon of some kind. I don't scare easy, but this scared me. Now I'm thinking possibly Sasquatch. We have had Bigfoot on our farm in upstate New York for 50 years. These ones are black, 7 to 9 feet tall. Also, they sound like a pack of coyotes, and they travel in family packs. One had red amber eyes, the other had emerald green eyes. Also, they never ever harmed anyone or our dogs. The only pets and livestock harmed were barn cats and 6-year-old calves. Cats would scream, then it was calm. The calves just gone. Not a break in the fence or any place. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, but on Father's Day weekend in 2015, my kids and I were camping in northern Utah. And no, we aren't Mormon. I've been hunting and camping my whole life. I grew up in South Texas and served 22 years in the military before I retired in Utah. I can't stand the humidity back home. My kids were making silly animal calls as it began to get dark. My youngest daughter was yelling, "Caw-caw," at the top of her lungs, and soon every kid in the campground, understand this is not KOA, we are in the mountains, was joining in. After a while, they quieted down and things got quiet. Nothing but crickets, but occasional owl hooting. The kids and I were roasting marshmallows around the fire when everything got deathly quiet. It was the kind of quiet that only happens when a predator is nearby. I heard something big moving through the trees towards us, so I put the kids behind me and pulled my pistol. I was expecting a coyote or a black bear, either of which my .45 would have killed or run off. What walked into camp stunned us. I was skeptic back then. This was a bipedal animal covered in thick blonde brown hair. It was faced to me. Looked like a mix between a human and a gorilla. That's the best I could describe it. This thing was at least half again as wide as me, and I'm a big boy, having lifted weights most of my life. This thing made me look small. But when our eyes locked, I lowered my pistol. This was an intelligent animal. It knew I was holding a weapon. We stood there looking at each other for a few seconds. It seemed like minutes. I looked for a zipper or anything that could show me that it was a person in a costume, but then I noticed his facial expressions and the muscles in his shoulders and legs. This creature had a curious look in his eyes. There was no malice in them. Kids were shook up. They were not going to sleep in the tent that night. Now I know Bigfoot is real. I came across a Bigfoot track back in 1991 along the road of Zabalos, BC, on Vancouver Island. It was probably about 18 inches long by 7 inches wide, stepping out of a small mountainside lake onto a sandy shoreline, then stones before the forest and beyond. There was only one footprint, 4 feet from the water's edge, another 5 or more feet into the rocks. I was 10 at the time, but living where we did, I was well aware of what a bear track looked like, and the track looked like a man's, but only bigger. There was no other tracks either, as it wasn't a lake that people go to, and we just happened to be there because our bus got flat on the way to Campbell River for swimming lessons.
My brother got that feeling when he was splitting wood at his house. He just stopped, didn't look around, but just walked straight into the house and got the family together with the guns and stayed up all night. Next morning, he found a mountain lion with 3 of his 4 legs ripped off. The head popped off and the tail ripped off. The 4th leg was twisted nearly off. No bite marks, no claw marks, nothing. Talked to some fire jumpers who would airdrop behind fire lines, and they said they had found bears in the same state with heads and legs ripped off. They were adamant that it's Bigfoot.
There's things out there that you just wouldn't believe. I arrived in the state of Washington in the ending year of 1978. We leased a place up on the river in the mountains with the closest neighbor about 1.5 miles, 2 miles up the road in the wilderness. My family and I were terrorized for 4 months that were there by one of the creatures or more. It got so bad we moved out on the snow and ice in February because of the night terror, I call it. I've been reading and hearing stories about these creatures making them appear calm and nice, but they could be far from that. They're very intelligent in their own way. It is my belief that they're possibly migrating away from the area shortly after Mount St. Helens erupted. Someday undeniable absolute proof will surface. I live on the west coast of Central Florida, a neighborhood that's situated in a forest of cypress trees, palms, and pines. When the sun sets, the woods come alive with a chorus of gators, frogs, birds, and bugs. One evening, the forest in our backyard became silent. Without notice, the silence was broken by cracking timbers. With the light of the moon, I could see the tops of the 30-foot trees shaking and then crashing to the ground. There were horrific screams, as if a battle of giants was taking place. The next morning, our backyard looked like a hurricane hit. Banana trees were uprooted and thrown everywhere. Maples were broken right in half. I never saw the beast, and I'm thankful for that. I want nothing to do with something so powerful and out of control. I cannot understand people who look for these things with the notion to photograph and befriend them. It's like trying to befriend a great white shark with a chum bag tied to your leg. Do you think a 308 would be sufficient protection from something of that caliber, or would it require a 50 cal rifle? I'm retired and live in the rural area of West Virginia between two rivers and the foothills of the mountains. We have seen young Sasquatches here from time to time, so I assume adults were nearby, but just more careful about not being seen. It took me a while to realize what they were, and people poo-pooed me when I told them what I was seeing. I surprised the little one recently in my raspberry patch, and I only got a glimpse as it shot off in the tall grass like it had been shot out of a cannon. People say, oh, it was a baby black bear. I've been out in the woods a lot and know a baby black bear kind of gallops along. This was no bear, so let's keep on telling our truth. I grew up in northern Vermont, dairy country, and just a couple miles from the Canadian border. A lot of my friends were raised on family farms, and I remember once going to a buddy's farm. We would go dirt bike riding and snowmobiling in the winter. One day while we were out, we came across a dead cow. It had been eaten off of, but we didn't know what by. Its back was broken, like a garage door came down on it, and its head was twisted in such a way that its bottom jaw was in line with the spine, so basically upside down. We went back and told his dad what we found, and he went back with a tractor and picked it up. Later in school, he said the cops came out and took pictures, but that was it, and they never heard anything as to what it might have been or who. Creeped us out, though. In July of 1973, I thought a bear was in my garbage, but when I turned on the outside light, an old weather person covered in white fur was standing on the other side of a pane of glass, about 6 feet in front of me. As soon as I reached for my rifle, he turned and walked up vertical cutaway and went around 60 feet without slipping. I tried running up it and had to grab roots to keep from slipping back down. This was on the border of Idaho and Wyoming on the west side of the Salt River, upstream 6 miles from the point where it flows into Palisades Res, and upstream is running south along the border and flows north. Nice big trout 46 years ago. I live in Humboldt County, and the event that happened to me was in the area that the first credible Bigfoot footage was taken. This happened in the early 70s. My friend and I would hitchhike to a place in Willow Creek. It was called Sandy Bar. Now keep in mind, I have not the best vision. I was looking up the ridge and saw what I thought was a black bear walking uphill, standing on his hind legs. Well, I told my friend that I was not comfortable with the bear around, so we packed up and hiked out. That was when we were aware of something big following us in the trees. We made it out and home, but the experience had rattled me. Did I mention that I was 16 at the time? Well, long story short, years later, I was recounting what we had experienced, and then I was told black bears do not walk on their hind legs. I was thinking, holy crap, what I seen was a Bigfoot. I live in Wilmington, Massachusetts. I was driving on 93 North with the person I'm not really friends with when a glowing green orb type craft with a bright orange center came shooting from the east to west and stopped directly in front of us about 30 feet off the ground and kept pace with traffic. It was about 20 feet across and 10 feet tall with the oval orb type shape. There was like a heat wave around the craft, distorting the view around it. It kept pace with us about 8 seconds and shot off to the west of the highway at the speed that is impossible. At least a couple hundred people witnessed this event, and it was even crazier than thing I've ever seen. I heard some type of roar. It was a few days after I seen the second one. It was terrifying. This is also where I seen my first prints. Growing up in this area, which is Riverton, Wyoming, along the Wind River, my granddad told us stories of his encounters. Friends on the Aparajo reservation have had encounters, and even law enforcement officers told stories. It's believed that they migrate the Wind River Basin while from Du Bois, Wyoming to Boysen Reservation east of Riverton. I live in a very small log cabin on a northwest central Wisconsin lake, and I've had huge beings slam into the side of my cabin right outside my bedroom window. There was a couple of small benches next to the outside wall at the time, and the predator must have been after some small animal sitting on one of them, maybe a cat or a squirrel. It must have gotten away and scurried under the floor of the front porch that is one side of my bedroom. I could hear the loud snuffing sound of a predator as if it was putting its nose to the opening under the porch to try to locate the animal. It was unnerving and very scary. This animal must have been huge, as when it hit it, it shook the entire cabin to the point where the cabinet doors sprung open and things fell off the shelves. It was definitely a heart-in-your-throat moment. My cabin is surrounded by very tall Norway or red pines with a thick layer of pine needles on the ground, and no definable footprints were there the next day. Don't be amazed, they're all over. When I was 10, I was spending the summer with my grandparents at their place in West Virginia. One hot night in August, we had the windows open, and it was just my grandmother and me at home. Grandpa was working second shift, probably 11 p.m. I was sitting in front of the window, and we were talking, eating, waiting for him to get home, when suddenly he began screaming behind me so loud like an ambulance siren. It sounded like a woman being murdered, scared me to death, and I froze. We just stared at each other until she yelled, "Come on," and grabbed me, and we ran down the hall away from the open window. I didn't see his face, but we did see eyes shine after we got a flashlight and shone out the back door. They lived in a remote wooded area. Today I live in north central Ohio, farm country. I've heard several Bigfoot and scary encounters reports from 10 miles of where I'm sitting typing this. Members of my family and friends and a couple of strangers. My sister and her husband saw a dark brown Bigfoot in broad daylight in July 2016, a mile from their house, 10 minutes from me. They were crossing a railroad and they looked right 100 feet down the track, and they saw a humanoid figure stand up and take one step over the track and down into the trees on the other side in fluid motion. The side of it came from the thicket of several acres where it crossed just to be sparse wooded area behind the house. The one guy just point blank asked if he ever seen anything strange around his house because he lives right behind property where someone keeps having visits from at least one Bigfoot over the years. He runs a fruit farm. I need raspberries. He told me he got the hell scared out of him in his barn one night. He was confronted by something, pissed off and growling. He said he didn't want to have to go back there after dark ever again. You'd have to see the country block he lives on. 3 orchards, a pumpkin farm, and his berry farm. Railroad runs through, lakes and ponds. The Mohican River is a couple miles away, and there's a square mile of thicket. They're definitely around. I grew up in a very remote part of West Virginia, my great-grandparents even more so, and I used to stay with them over the weekends when I was a kid. My grandfather would take me out trout fishing, honey hunting, berry picking, and whitetail deer hunting. My grandfather grew up in this area his entire life from the 1910s to 1990s. He spoke often about his story, which he was in his early 20s. While this remote part of WV, there was 3 to 4 homes within a few miles of each other, and he had several friends who he grew up with. One had a younger brother. One day, the younger brother did not make it home from school. Back then, he had to walk a few miles from where the bus dropped him off on a small dirt road along the creek side, the same creek we used to fish as a boy. A few weeks before this has happened, those in the area started hearing similar sounds of what started Sounded like a woman screaming up the mountains and always at night. After the boy disappeared, they started searching for him and later found him barely clinging to life, hiding in a small abandoned coal camp temple wash plant. They created a search party and eventually found and shot what had attacked and chased the boy, and what was creating those sounds of the woman screaming. It was a dark, black mountain lion panther of some sort, which was extremely rare even back in those days. In those days, it was commonplace for a young West Virginia boy to carry a knife, something like an old Boy Scout knife or Swiss Army. That is how the boy lived. He stabbed the cat in the eye. While he had some significant bites and scratches while it was extremely cold, he was scared to leave that the cat ran away with the knife stuck in his eye. Thankfully, he was found in time before the second night missing. I've been outdoorsman my entire life. I shot my first whitetail when I was 6 years old and caught my first fish at 4. I know the woods in my native northern West Virginia like nothing else. I've seen everything from the very rare mountain lion a mile from my house to hearing bobcat screams on an early morning deer hunt. I've heard and seen it all in my area. I've told my stories and been scoffed at and criticized as. Let's start this first story with saying I'm not sure to this day what I saw, but I do know that it kept me out of the woods behind my house for months. Occasionally, I would walk to my back porch to take a piss and look at the hollers and ridges around me. It's just something we do regardless of having access to perfectly fine running water. I was around 10 to 11 years old and I was pissing and looking around. I heard the snap of a large branch about 80 to 100 yards away, and from the standing on my back porch, there's this great big spruce that was on the tree line of the field near the source of the sound, and I looked in that direction. Now I remember specifically seeing this being standing there, absolutely massive and covered in hair, but from where I was, it was hard to tell how tall it was. It was holding 8 to 10 foot long branches and logs under his left arm, and it was snapping branches off with his right hand and sliding them under his left arm along with the other branches. I watched it snap 2 or 3 more large branches from that tree. It eventually had its fill and turned with one motion and disappeared into the valley. I immediately freaked out and ran into the house, crying and sobbing, and ran to my father, who continued to assure me that I was somehow misidentified this being that I can clearly see in my head to this day. 10 years later. A few months later, after the leaves dropped off, I could see more than 30 yards into the valley and decided I wanted to go see these branches it was taking. These branches were about chest to chin level with this thing. We're all 7 feet off the ground. At one point, I got a feeling of being the size of a pinhead and very unsafe where I was. I ran back to my house where I was and stayed in fear, watching out my window every chance I got. Had a relative who is a sheriff's deputy who told a story of a friend that was hunting at night here in Georgia. They saw 2 red eyes and an outline. It was massive. Yes, we have them in Georgia too. I've had encounters in Northern Territory, Australia as I prospect, not sure if Yowie. Next to my camp at night, the sound of a large branch breaking was as strange as there was being no chance of anyone else but my crew of 5. I've come across white orbs in one area just as the sun went down, started to set up camp. Whatever these glowing orbs were, they were throwing rocks, so we left. Never scared as I was loaded, but I had full respect for the bush and what lives in it. Never had to shoot. I've become one with nature and feel a welcoming vibe. I feel an overwhelming sense of happiness and interpret the knocks and stick breaks as a welcoming gesture. There's no need to hunt the yowies, just go about your business. Don't be scared, otherwise don't be there. I live in Horse Camp, Queensland, Australia. I breed Irish wolfhounds. One night a few months ago, while I was sitting around the fire, we heard what sounded like a woman screaming. The dogs took off, but soon came back, shaking and scared. They're big dogs. They have killed dingoes here before.
Master the art of music. Learn guitar and bass. drums, singing and screaming. I will teach you how to handcraft your music your way. Visit oneboundmusic.com. ONEBOUND music.com.
Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often, they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least, that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here.
Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!
The flesh of the unguided and non-believers fuel this void.